Hello, everybody. Welcome. So glad you're joining me in whatever time and place you may be doing so. Extremely grateful for those of you that take the time, have the interest and the curiosity to unforget together. There's this idea, this principle that has prevailed throughout what we can understand of the history of our species and the development of our minds. And I think these words can be very confusing. So we have words like consciousness, mind, thought, cognition, sentience, sensitivity, faculties, awareness, insight, knowledge. These words orbit some central aspect of our nature that we really don't have a very good idea about. But many of the ancients, and particularly we know that the Greeks, believed is the wrong word, right? I don't believe that water is wet or quenches my thirst. It's not a belief. It's it's something that is sometimes referred to as qualia. Again, the words can be very confusing. All of the words that I listed orbit something we don't know what it is. Yeah? And in fact, if you are careful and you think very deeply about human knowledge, which is something I'm always attempting to do better than I've done before, you will immediately realize that the entire domain of human knowledge is based on references to things we don't know what they are. And in point of fact, with trivial exceptions that have a very limited scope of applicability or trustworthiness, humans don't know what anything is. We know which tokens match to phenomena that we're familiar with, but we haven't the faintest idea. In other words, and this is, profound and rich with the potential for insight, but we usually ignore it because we believe that it's unachievable. Right? In order to know, in a reliable sense, what something is, we would necessarily have to have answered, not necessarily perfectly or correctly, but very reliably, fundamental questions about the nature of existence, origin, why there are beings, why there are conscious beings, sentient beings, minds, what the universe is. And having completely failed to answer these questions, this leaves us in a very dangerous position where nearly all of our knowledge systems are based on provisional conveniences that are fundamentally untrustworthy because their basis is circular reference to other undefined things. And it's not that we want to go around defining things, right? Defining is de-infinitization, yeah? And again, in point of fact, any phenomena, being or object, literally, and I mean this in the old sense, not the more modern one, has infinite qualities, characteristics, features, relationships, and so forth. So the de-infinitization, this defining game that the humans like to play, is a convenience, right? But many of the ancients, particularly the Greeks, they believed that insight, understanding, true knowledge, or knowledge that is less wrong, is not invented in the way that we tend to think, but rather it is recovered from the before of our existence. Yeah? And the Greeks had at least a couple of words, although they had a variety of words, that I'm familiar with. Anamnesis, or unforgetting, and aletheia. Now, aletheia is much more complex, and I'm not really qualified to comment deeply on it, though my last published recording was named, the image for the recording is the Greek word aletheia. And I may be mispronouncing it. I'm not Greek. It could be aletheia. It might even be, a much stranger sounding thing, where the TH has a different sound and the EA has a different sound. But they also had words for different forms of knowledge. And this is something very few moderns think much about, though philosophers might, linguists might. So, for example, there was logos, and I don't actually know if I can remember the paired word that goes with it. It might be nous or nous. I'm not sure. But essentially, we can understand that there are forms of structured knowledge, and there are other forms of knowledge that are much more fluid and open. Now, in the human knowledge traditions, right, we have this tree-like structure of branches. So, for example, if we examine the branches of science, or the social sciences, or psychology, or philosophy, right? It should be apparent that these branches have a central trunk that links all the forms of human knowledge into one field. But we do not play in that field. Not much. I have had experience of forms of thought and awareness and insight that originate outside the cages of human knowledge, where every communication necessarily includes and implicates all the possible branches of knowledge. A form of unity over the tree of the branches. And this was one of the most fascinating and compelling experiences of my life. But it's not what I'm here to talk about today. So, at least in some cultures, there was the perspective that insight and understanding, the most valuable forms of reflective awareness around some topic about which we could speak, were recovered from the beyond, or the before, or the after of life, of incarnation. And I think there's something very important here. Having had direct experiences of something like this, that obliterated all of the things that I had previously believed or opined upon, thought, supposed, imagined. The experiences that I had in 2002 particularly completely laid waste, obliterating them with beauty and a sort of an infinitely self-surpassing continuum of insight, right? Not like single deliverable insights about this or that. But rather a flowing, almost explosive, evanescent continuum of transcendence. Right? Very few of us have any kind of experience like this, though some features of mania, madness, or the shocking insight of prodigies may resemble slightly what I'm pointing toward here. So most of us do not have much of an experience of this, at least not as adults, though as children we may have had experiences, many of which may now be lost to memory, of this kind of ecstasy, right? The relief or the non-presence of stasis in the mind. Yeah. And we are trained as moderns, like monkeys playing on an artificial structure, to stay on the branches previously established in language, conception, evaluation, consideration, thought, imagining, and so forth. This is a dire and terrifying situation. This is a system of prisoneered cages. Useful where it is useful. I want to, be able to understand how a ratchet works to fix a machine, or, I want to be able to build machines or so forth. It's okay for me to think that the cup is a cup, that it can hold water and so forth. In the very limited, we don't usually think this way, the moderns worship utility, right, which is a very dangerous thing to do, in case that isn't obvious. So the utilitarian functional convenience of the knowledge systems that we are impressed with, scripted with, that are imposed on us during the processes of enlanguaging and enculturation in childhood, are not unimportant. We wouldn't want to get rid of them. But what we would like to do, what everyone would like to do, I think, your mileage may vary, is to adjust the aperture of their dominance over our capacity to see, to have insight, to be inspired, to go beyond what has been seen, known, said, thought, supposed, declared previously. To shatter the cages without destroying, minimizing our worship of utilitarianism, materialism, reductive materialism, and the dogmatic suppositions that therein dwell. So I think what we would like, and what I would like, is not just to reduce the aperture that would limit the dominance of these provisional forms of knowledge and convenient time skipping, features of what most humans will understand to be knowledge, but also to establish new lenses, right? To constantly establish new lenses that enable us to see what we have never before been able to perceive or become aware of or understand. Because the grasp of existing knowledge on the nature of existence, the possibility space of existence, and intelligence itself is minute. Now, I've always been a little suspicious of human knowledge systems, But it wasn't until my experience in 2002 with what I sometimes think of as an NHI complex that I had direct, shocking, overwhelming liberation from these traps. Much like a bird that has been in a cage that is not much bigger than its body its entire life, suddenly being dropped into the free atmosphere. So amazing. So beyond anything I could have previously hoped for or imagined. And yet, like you, I'm a regular human still in the aftermath of these experiences. I still struggle within the cages of thought and knowledge that I have become habituated to. And in the aftermath of my experience, I underwent something very similar to what happened in childhood. The resubjugation of my mind to the atmosphere, the trenchant gravity of human knowledge systems. Now, some of you may think, or it's possible to suppose, that we are humans, so of course human knowledge is, the nature and limit of our abilities. No, there's nothing that is not even slightly true. The aspect of you that is human is so minute compared to the rest of what you and we and beings and organisms and animals and human beings, quote unquote, are or can become, that if you think you're only human, you're merely human, or even you are, you have the privilege of being a human being, you've got things completely backwards and inside out. The universe localizes itself in beings and relationships and forms. And so first, you are the universe and that which generates it. Then perhaps you are something transcendental, which we might use the word soul or spirit to refer to. And that aspect most likely has a number of organs, much like the Egyptians believed. My dear friend Normandy Ellis, who spent her life studying hieroglyphs in Egypt, will soon be giving a talk on the 9, I think, aspects of the soul that the Egyptians not proposed, but encoded. Then, perhaps you are an organism, and think of think of the difference between a human being and the space of organisms on Earth. Okay? That is the difference between your humanity and your nature. In short, how, who, what, where, why, when, which you are. I was trying to make sure I hit all 7 of the question words. I think I only hit 6 of them. So this is one of the fundamental deceptions that we are all imprinted with. You are human and you are merely human. There's no chance of this being true. It'd be just as likely that you could drop a penny and it would land on one of the moons of Saturn. It's just not even possible. And yet many of the things we are trained to believe are precisely like this. We see them as facts. We understand them as facts. Yet not only are they untrue, it is impossible that they could be true. And this is a weird kind of impossibility. It's not the impossibility of infinitudes, right? It's not the impossibility of the kind of thing that I was talking about with the penny and the moon of Saturn. It's not that kind of impossibility. It's a much weirder kind. It's the impossibility of a limitation imposed upon thought, conception, awareness, perception, ideation, imagination, that presents itself as tyrannically dominant, must be the facts, and is at the same time not only not the facts, but inconceivably less, right? Inconceivably limiting in some way that if you let that monster in the door, a plethora of horrible monsters will surely follow. We are also trained to think that we are individuals. We are separated human persons. This is abject nonsense. There are 0 separate objects or beings in the universe. None. This is a conception in language, a deceptive conception, a perverse conception, that also cannot be true. Does it have 0 truth value? No. In certain conceptual systems, it is the case. And we would not want to do away again entirely with the perspective that separate beings exist. But that perspective must be held within a much more trenchant, verifiable, obvious, and true perspective that beings exist together always. And so in this sense, you are the sky, you are origin, you are the universe, you are all the organisms on all the worlds, you are right now the entire network of organisms on this world. You are all of the humans localized as one human and localizing, right? This isn't a finished process that happened in the past when you were born. It's a pulsing, right? Like your breathing or your heart, yeah? It's a pulsing. The entire network of living beings is one being, and unity pulses through that field, probably an inconceivable number of times per picosecond. And yet all of these things we are trained to never think. And, I could find millions of people who would become very upset if I made assertions like those I'm making here, and call me mad and say, oh, that can't be true, and all these kinds of things, yet they have no knowledge of what anything is. They're absolutely certain of the facts, but they have neither direct experience nor knowledge of the nature of the supercontainer within which phenomena and beings and so forth arise. And without that experience and understanding, it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be self-improving, right? You want to be less wrong with each move. You'll never get perfect insight, I don't think. That idea of perfection is not, in my mind, it doesn't mean a complete, concise, correctly elaborated structure. Rather, it means something evanescent, something transcendental, to follow the signal of unity back into its origin and forth into distinction, actively in each moment of awareness. Something like this. So I gravely mistrust human knowledge systems, with the exception that in contexts where they are appropriate or useful, I grant them some degree of confidence. You were born to cognize non-human knowledge, right? You were born to experience the entire range of the possibility space of the universe, of beings, of souls, of spirits, of transcendent minds. These are your mind. We have been trapped in the fingernail on the body of our intelligence, right? In the little pinky fingernail on the right hand. And this trapping aspect is extremely militant, tyrannical, and intends to declare dominion over all perspective, all the possibility spaces. But what humans actually have a grasp on is surely far less than 1% with knowledge systems, right? And in fact, the other ways of knowing, the ways of the heart, the ways of the soul, the ways of our essential nature, however we may point at this, these ways so vastly supersede structured knowledge as to render it trivial, again, with the exceptions of the contexts in which such knowledge is veritable, is useful, is helpful, and is provisionally, because of the limitations of the scope, true. For example, at one scale, it is true that within the current field of my vision, I can count 9 objects that the humans call automobiles, cars. From another perspective that is much more trenchant, I am not here. There are no such things as cars. What is here is awareness, consciousness, sentience, transcendence. From a perspective even more profound, what is here is communion of all beings in all moments on all worlds. Right? Now, most of us are not going to have experiences of this, and merely saying these things is unhelpful. What we need is a direct experience of such matters. And the spiritual traditions, particularly those involving meditation and so forth, have the capacity to allow us to cut through the trenchant domination of conceptual knowledge and nomenclature. You know, throughout most of my life, though I've lived in my own way a very inspired and curious and intelligent and passionate life, I have also lived an extremely limited, naive, sometimes arrogant or proud, a life of filled with webs of hubris. The unique gifts that accompanied me into this incarnation did not so muchly include humility. However, and I have great, resounding regret about my failings as a human being, and as a person, and as a being, and as a soul. I tend to use those regrets to drive me toward virtue and insight and reconciliation. But I am certainly have been and still am. I'm fraught with failings. My capacity to see beyond what most of those around me could see instilled a kind of a false confidence. And as we know from the Greeks, hubris summons nemesis. Many times I've experienced this. But I want to speak today, thank you for bearing with my long preamble, about a triangle, or maybe, I resist making it a square. The geometric solids are profoundly important. Geometry itself is profoundly important to the possibilities of insight. But it's very difficult to say precisely why this is so. It shows us the the possible structure of thought, awareness, mind, and so forth. Right? A point can be extended into a line if you spin that line. If it's a horizontal line to begin with and you spin it, what is it? If you spin it to the vertical, and then you do this back and forth very quickly, you get a cross. And then if you just spin it around the point, you get a disc. And if you spin it around the point off the plane, you get a sphere. And there are further, much more astonishing transformations. So, the single valued that is this is like collapsing to a point, right? A line at least gives you a continuum. The cross expands that continuum. The disc gives you radical degrees of liberty, right? You now have the capacity to approach the subject or the focus from many, not just from each of the degrees around the circle, but from many simultaneous degrees around the circle. Now you're closing in on insight. Of course, the sphere explodes that dramatically, and the future progressions of that progression are inappropriate for this context and unimaginable to ordinary minds. Hyperspheres and so forth. Transcendental objects or geometries. So what I'm trying to say is we are trained to stick to single value declarations of identity, function, purpose, nature, and so forth, yet nothing in nature is like this except human thinking and language. Hello. So what I want to talk about today, I don't have to make a shape. The transcendental being, incarnated existence or life, and death. Now this death word, I want to do some rather cursory alphabetics about it. So the D can be understood as distinguishing. Let's distinguish. And notice the onomatopoeia here between the word distinguish and the word extinguish. Right? They both have this tinguish element or suffix or body. And I'm not going to do the alphabetics on that, but just notice that to distinguish and to extinguish have, they share features. Distinguish, extinguish. What is being extinguished? Communion. What is communion? Well, communion is the active sense of inter, and transcendental being, shared being in all moments, circumstances, organisms, biologies, ecologies, planets, worlds, stars, all of these things, shared. instantaneously, moment to moment, across all possible boundaries. But locally, down here on Earth as a separate human being, what is extinguished is one face of the relational intimacies we enjoy while incarnate. D. To divide, to distinguish, sometimes, not always, to destroy. E. Emergence, energy, efflorescence. DE. The word emergency often is understood to mean an undesirable crisis, but birth is an emergency, too. A can be understood as the first principle, the one that goes forth. The explorer, the pioneer, the pathfinder, the hero, in a sense, the heroine, the waymaker, maker of ways. T, the tree, the branches of distinction and relation, characteristics, qualities, and so forth. And H is the very breath of life, that ha sound, which if you were to breathe it upon a mirror would make myriad little droplets, all reflecting both their origin, the surface of the mirror, and each other, each one uniquely. Right? So you can see that you can have something that appears to be separate, right? One of the droplets. Right? Yet, in what way is it separate? All of the other droplets and its origin are reflected in it. Now, it may not be true that all of the other droplets are reflected in it. In fact, it seems unlikely, doesn't it? So what will be reflected most obviously on the mirror surface some philosophically inclined persons walked past me just now. What a novelty. They must be pot smokers. Hippies talking about philosophical matters and transcendence and speakings, about genders and so forth. So what will be reflected first in each droplet is the droplets nearest it. And, if you imagine that the droplets are in some kind of random pattern, which they probably are not merely in a random pattern, then the nearest ones will occlude from reflection those that are farther away. By the way, this is new for me. I had not noticed this problem with my little toy before. Yet, as they all have one origin, and all of them reflect, for example, my face, breathing, that is just breathed onto the mirror, this ha sound, breath of life. They are unified both by the surface of the mirror, i.e. the universe, creation, and that which creates the universe. That which is transcendental to the physical universe, and yet is its origin and nature. So all of them will reflect my face, my eyes, my mouth, my nose, my ears, since my face is what is close to this little mirror in my hand. And all of them are unified by the context of the mirror itself. And creation, the universe, the supercontainer, can be usefully, in a toy-like way, conceived of thus. So D, to divide, distinguish, determine. E, energy, emergence, efflorescence, flowering, coming forth. A, first principle, traveler, one who goes forth, like rays of light from the sun, so to speak. T, the tree of diverging branches unified by the trunk. Tree of life, tree of beings, the tree of families, the tree of knowledge, the tree of insight, the tree of origin. And H, into the breath, into both individuation and unification at once, death. I guess we should examine life, too, this way. L, a sort of a bridge above all obstacles, light itself, luminance. I don't have a lot of reference for this L. It is to transcend that which transcends or presides over the appearance of distinction. I, into the appearance of individuals. Right? That little dot above the I can be understood as origin, and the rod beneath it as a being. F is fragments, fractions, fractals, though there's something better than a fractal. Nature doesn't make actual fractals. That's a concept. What nature does is much more profound, so that each register of the observable structure reflects both the nature of origin, continuity, communion, unity, distinction, and each register reflects these things in new ways, right? This is wildly unlike the human concept of a fractal, generally speaking, though those who have examined this carefully will be aware of what I'm speaking of. Your body is like this, right? At the register of your hand, it has a very similar structure to the register of your entire body, right? There's one unifying body, the palm, 4 working members, the fingers, like your limbs, one thinking member with 2 joints, like the head, but radically different in their expressions of origin, potential, possibility, and so forth. And then E, emerging, right? Emerging now, right? Emerging, the transfer of knowledge, potential, awareness, possibility, liberation, understanding, in between all living beings, life, death. So, at this late phase of my life, and I've made another recording about the topic of death previously. I think it's called Death, Getting It Backwards. And in this recording, I speculate that we are really confused about death. There's nothing wrong with it. Of course, suffering, we would like, for beings to be able to avoid it. But that itself would be tragic and devastating. No one wants to suffer. I do not wish for anyone to suffer. I hope to cause as little harm in my life as possible, however poorly I may achieve that. Yes, so I suspect that what we call our intuition and many of the non-ordinary faculties that we are mostly told do not exist, it's just nonsense. These are the the nectar of our death leaking back into the present moment. And I think our preferences, what we are attracted to and what we wish to avoid, these also have to do with the light of our death shining backwards into our lives. And possibly, I think very likely also, the light of our previous deaths shining forwards into our lives. But my goal here is to incline you to entertain this concept of death as a form of illumination. Right? And what do I mean by this? Well, for the sake of playing together, imagine that somehow, perhaps metaphysically or magically, in the last week of your existence, you are given to know that you have 7 days left. How might this transform your behavior? Now, when we're just speaking about this, it's an intellectual thing. It's an abstract, hypothetical thing. But if we take it very seriously, the existence of our death very crucially transforms our capacities for virtue and development and being beautiful while yet we live. So now that I am an older person, I never really expected to live this long, to be clear. And that was a mistake on my part. Of course, most of the mistakes that I've made in my life have to do with a single error. And it's the error pointed at when we use the phrase, to take for granted. I took for granted that my parents would always exist. They had always existed. Or I had no experience of them not existing. I knew conceptually that one day they will die. When they actually died, oh my God, the terror and pain and agony and confusion that upwelled in my heart and the core of my being. But now that I am an older person and I know that my own life will follow the path of theirs, that this guy who's speaking now will disappear from this living world, at least temporarily, and possibly forever, although I think that's wildly unlikely. There's also 9,000 ways in which I won't disappear from the world just because my body has gone. But being an older person and now having to take death rather seriously, this light causes me to shed fictions under which I have long labored and via which I have caused unjust suffering to others. I'm very aware of this now. Not in a purely judgmental or critical sense, but rather in the sense that transforms me moving forward through my life path, forward so to speak, into my life path. And so death is a kind of a light inside my awareness, my perspective now. And this light, it burns up lies. It just naturally divests us of clothing we may have somehow acquired or constructed for the self, the ego, the personal self, all of which are primarily fictions. We don't need to destroy these fictions, but we would like to be relieved of them, because it is very liberating to be relieved of them. And they are cages that are deceptive and misguide our inner seeing, our pathfinding, our behavior, our development, and so forth. Many spiritual traditions, whether they do this explicitly or implicitly or by association, directly ask us to keep death, to keep the sun of our death alive in our awareness moment to moment. For it is obvious that none of us, well, that's not entirely true. Many humans are what is sometimes called precognitive, or they have faculties that are precognitive. I think this is actually somewhat confused. It's not that they're actually precognitive, it's that your mind exists along the entire timeline of your life and before and beyond it. And normally there's a bunch of boundary, sort of membrane buffers, primarily that were established by thinking and enculturation, that lead you to believe, unfortunately, that the future is inaccessible to your awareness. This is not the case. So we have these words like precognition that refer to the violation of that expectation, but that expectation is fundamentally false. It protects not our insight or intelligence, but rather an array of structures in human knowledge systems that are domineering, contagious, colonizing, false, tyrannical, and debilitating. And these structures in the human knowledge systems, as if they were beings or demons, militantly defend against their, violation, which would result in liberty for human awareness, a person's awareness, a group of people's awareness, and so forth. So death is the awareness of the certainty of your physical death is crucially important for the development of many aspects of our nature and being that have little to do with utility and much to do with virtue, valor. We all are trained to think that we must preserve our lives at nearly any cost or all costs. This is nonsensical. When one begins to come to an age where it is obvious that one will die before too very long, a whole new array, if one is not already crystallized, a whole new array of concerns that were momentous in childhood, but were occluded or inhibited or edited or re-engineered. A vast array of concerns come to the forefront of one's awareness, desire, motivation, and so forth. And one may realize, and many humans have done this, that the best thing they can do, or at least a very desirable thing, is to give the gift of their life, to rescue or heal or reconcile the lives of others, hopefully many, many others. And if we have not been doing this throughout our lives, it will certainly be, it's not true. It is much more likely that we will become aware of our failings and may reorient when we become aware of the incipience of death. So what I would actually suggest, and this has been suggested to me, and I played with it some, but it did not really become foremost in my awareness throughout my life, We should maintain always and live and think and be as if we will die in an hour, we will die in a day, we will die in a week, we will die in a month. We will not go wrong. Very unlikely. Most of the mistakes we make, most of the mistakes I've made, I'll speak for myself, had a lot to do with presuming, eternalizing the beings that I loved and myself and so on. And this is part of why it was profoundly shocking and agonizing when they passed away. Now also, there's another weird and important feature of death, which is, and again, it's a kind of illumination, right? When a being that we love dies, or sometimes when a situation that we're very enmeshed with transforms, we feel agony not just because of the loss of the situation, but because of the unfulfilled aspects of our own participation with the beings that we love. I wish I had more time. Why? Because if I knew that, they were going to die today, I would have been more present. I would have been more loving. I would have been more generous. I would have been less self-absorbed, less self-important. So this is another of the great lights, the great illuminations of death. It is profoundly medicinal, healing, and beautiful to remain aware of these matters before the beings and places and circumstances and relationships that give us life, that give life to us, that compose and weave the fabric of existence in our hearts and minds and beings and souls before they depart. This layer of existence. The simplest, obvious proclamation of this light of death is love now, live now, be present now, participate now, care now, give kind, gentle, loving, compassionate care to all beings now, in this moment. Do not allow yourself to become distracted in the labyrinth of the felt sense of an eternality of the self and the relationships. Even if they are eternal, and I suspect they have many aspects that are, I have good reason to suppose this, or to not suppose, to see this way, to see as if it is thus. Even if they are eternal, this local context of incarnate existence as a being, an organism, an animal, a human person, and so forth, is very precious here. Yeah? It's very valuable, even if there is eternality, even if nothing is lost. The unique appearance of limitations and separateness here in the physical layer of the dandelion or our incarnation is a developmental accelerant, right? One could, I think, usefully and meaningfully compare it to a school or an adventure, or both. In fact, we should compare it to 9 things. The life of a tree, the life of the universe, the life of an ecology, the life of a living world, the life of an intelligence or mind, all of these. Yeah. So even if distinction and separation most fundamentally are appearances, they are not merely appearances. There is a crucially trenchant or what's the right word? Trustworthy. There's a trustworthy aspect to the seemings of distinction, separation, individuation, and so forth, that serves all beings heroically and beautifully. It's very profound. We should not dismiss this, though we should also not be ruled by it. The light, I think it's my perspective that time is nothing like what we imagine it to be, what we've been told it is like. First, it is a transcendental principle or being, or more than being. It generates beings, right? What is that which generates beings? Ordinarily, we would probably select God or the universe. Neither is sufficient. In fact, the word God is quite deceptive compared to what is most likely actually I almost said the case. It's not true either. It's inconceivable, right? We need a space that is inconceivable in awareness, and it doesn't mean we should not push toward it. It just means that we will never capture it, encompass it with terms or concepts. Although we are all life-seeking, it should be blatantly obvious, watching humans, that we are also death-seeking. This is not an accident. And these ideas of, immortalizing the personal identity and so forth, these are insane and extremely dangerous. Death is one of the great virtues of that which is. And one of the primordial and absolutely necessary principles. You would want death. Like if given the option of eternal existence as Darren, or death, reincarnation, so forth, multi-incarnation simultaneously, which I think is obviously going on, you would choose death, right? You would definitely not want to be stuck with Darren for eternity. Neither as Darren nor as someone else. So even if there is no metaphysics, right, and it's just biology and so forth, you'd still want a new body that was appropriate for the world time in which the body exists, right? My body, being born sometime in the 60s, was born for a world that is almost gone, right? I will need and desire a new body, and not one that just preserves. You see, you want to be washed clean of all the accoutrement you have collected and made anew to go again, right? As a new being. Obviously, an intelligent being would desire this, rather than the trenchant, eternal concreteness of everything I've collected and so forth. Even sleep and dreaming are like this, right? They are like little deaths. Orgasm is also not merely a kind of a punny thing from the French, right? Little death. Le petit mort, the little death. Each breath, right? Each heartbeat is new. The last heartbeat dies away, the next one comes. The last breath goes away, the next one comes. You can imagine a being that is so concerned about eternal existence that it draws in a breath and doesn't want to give it up. I don't know if I'll get another one. I better keep this one, right? I have deep and abiding trust, though my mind, my thought, my thinking is frightened of death. I have deep and abiding trust in the nature of that which is. To preserve that which is beautiful and good, and to shed that which is worthy of shedding. And the personal identity is most worthy of shedding. You don't want to just never have one, right? It's a process, right? It's a developmental process. You forge a personal identity, you explore that space, then you begin to realize its limitations, then perhaps you begin to slough it off. And dreaming and exploration and so forth, deep, loving relationships and these kinds of things dissolve that personal identity. naturally, beautifully, virtuously. It is good. Death is good. I recently had a communication with a person unknown to me. We happened to exchange voice messages over some ridiculous app. And when I asked this person what was most beautiful and compelling in this moment of their life, they said something so profound. I don't think I've ever heard a person speak this directly to me. And I have to paraphrase, but she said, to see the beauty in horror and death and tragedy is amazing. And it blew me away. I am aware of this idea and have occasionally experienced it myself to some degree, but to have someone articulate this so concisely and bravely was very transformative and medicinal for me. It had not occurred to me, as many things don't, until later. Oh yeah, that's the other thing, okay. That she had recently experienced a devastating loss. Now then there is the retrospection that arises within us when a relationship or situation or beings that we love when they die. Yeah. We retrospect over the entire span of the relationship, and we see beauties that we were previously unaware of. Yeah? We had not been paying attention. I'm speaking just for myself, but I think this is a very common experience for humans. Because we were distracted and we were worried about, oh, I think I'll have a hamburger and, I better go to work and do the laundry and pay the bills and all of these ridiculous, largely parasitic aspects of our modern experience. And so this is another way in which the light of death wakes us up, shaves off the fictions that we had been living under the sway of. So many lights this death shines in awareness if we will sustain awareness of it, moment to moment. It keeps us from being distracted and from taking things for granted, from checking out, from missing the mark. Whether or not we are religious has little bearing on the fact that we know we have made grave mistakes in relationships, in our treatment of other beings, the living world, in the orientation of our attention, consciousness, concern, and behavior. All of these things are natural to us, right? We, unlike most animals, are most capable of defection from that which is essential. And part of this has to do with being representational cognitives. We can be very blinded by thoughts, conceptions, beliefs, identifications. Surely we would all like to see more deeply, more beautifully, more brilliantly, more intelligently, more compassionately. And death is the best medicine for that. So these are some of my reflections for today. I remember all those wise and beautiful beings who were my companions and teachers, with great love and reverence and humility. And where I have wronged them, I ask for their mercy, for their compassion, for I surely have done so. and will probably do so again. Perhaps, though, less unconsciously, as in other phases of my life. For the light of death shines in my awareness these days brightly. I see by that full moon aspects of my interiority and path that I had been unconscious of. So grateful for this time. The topic may seem dark, but I think I have painted its brightness with some degree of success. This probably will not be the last time I explore this topic, though it might well be. I just feel gratitude and reverence and love right in this moment. And the desire to shed the fictions that have occluded my awareness. I hope that you may also find value in this and shed some fictions. Let us help each other to do so. Thank you for joining me. Please take a moment to like, share, comment, question, offer an insight, a criticism, or support my work in whatever way feels natural to you in this moment. I appreciate all of you, and I hope that the spirit of insight will dwell in your heart and mind, will make her temple there and shine forth into the world and all the worlds. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to learning and unforgetting and seeing better together again very soon. Bye-bye for now.